Wouldn't it be in your interest to try to convince all the Americans that you don't want more data centers in your county and to make that a political issue going into the midterms? Like, do you think it's possible that China has been seeding messaging and other things like that so that people fight against data centers and it becomes like a homegrown, we don't want data centers when really it's China pushing behind the scenes? Welcome to the Outside the Valley podcast. I'm Kevin Fee, and that's Reagan McCullough. And today we're going to be discussing the backlash against data centers, the current role of AI agents in day-to-day life, the ethical questions around AI therapists. We're also going to be talking about how Anthropic's Fable model hasn't seen the adoption that was planned, and also how hardware companies like Amazon and Apple are hiking prices because of the price of memory chips. First topic today is about the backlash of data centers. So Reagan, what are your thoughts about the backlash to data centers? Do you think it's reasonable or unreasonable? What are your opinions?
Yeah, some of the backlash that's currently happening, it seems like a little bit spawns out of the fact that we're just in midterm season. Some of the candidates are now just looking to score points with their constituents and try to seem like they're standing with the people, if you will. Some of the backlash against data centers is well warranted, depending on the stats that you look at, because a lot of people worry about the strain that it'll put on public utilities, whether it be the water supply, whether it be the power grid, whether it be the noise in the surrounding communities. And some of those are generally fair, some of those aren't. To be quite honest, it's a little bit difficult to sift through some of the data because there's a Rutgers University report that was published on July 22nd, 2026. And it actually indicated that there wasn't any material increase in electricity bills in the areas surrounding data centers. However, there's a Bloomberg report that also claimed that wholesale electricity costs have increased as much as 267% over the past 5 years in communities that also surround data centers. That might just be a difficulty in where data is surveyed from. And I would say that when a good rule of thumb to go by is if these data centers are connecting to a local power grid, one of the big things that is going to happen is that they'll need higher voltage transmission lines that will be able to transmit higher voltages and higher sums of power to the data centers for the chips to run off of. And the on its face, it certainly seems like it will increase power costs. And so you have governors like Kathy Hochul in New York, who I believe she's declared either an indefinite moratorium or at least a 1 year moratorium on any new data center builds. You also have Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania, who signed a bill that put the developers as the ones liable for all the excess costs for electricity and for all the excess utility costs that the power companies will have to absorb for the higher voltage transmission. So
Mhm.
some of the backlash is pretty well warranted because with this inflation problem that's continued basically since COVID and hasn't been entirely mitigated, it's difficult then when you see companies with more money than God effectively then saying that they're going to connect to your local power grid and they're going to use it to power a data center that will require the power of a community of 500,000 people or something. I mean,
Yeah.
these GPUs are really, they're not, they're very power hungry. And yeah, it's,
But isn't that mostly in places where their power grid is already mostly utilized? Because if you're in a spot where they had excess capacity on the grid, then wouldn't it make it cheaper for the people in that geography to then get cheaper power because the fixed costs are then allocated across more electricity, therefore people would be getting cheaper electricity?
that would be a good point. The question is, with the amount of power transmission that you have, I'd assume that with the amount that a data center would require, you need it near a relatively concentrated municipal area that has high transmission already. So while it would seem like it'd just be a brilliant idea to put these in northern Canada, where you already have some geographical help with the cooling and with the isolation from local power grids, you also have the difficulty of, if we're using the transmission lines that are catering to a community of 10,000 people versus a community of 50,000 or 200,000, then will it just require a lot more upfront investment from a power or from a data center developer to even get this up and running and and running effectively? That's a difficult thing, and I'm sure that that's something that will require, that has already caused a headache for a lot of these hyperscalers that are building out data centers. And it's also a difficulty too when it comes to other things like having a good water source for the cooling. And so that's a difficult thing to see. And at a minimum, one thing that I could imagine that would continue to go on is backlash. And you could expect to see more policies, like at least the one that Josh Shapiro signed, where it's requiring developers to cover the electricity cost, and it's requiring them to cover the excess investment that's required by the utilities that would otherwise get passed off onto the consumers. So
But
what are
if you
your
were
thoughts on
China, wouldn't it be in your interest to try to convince all the Americans that you don't want more data centers in your county and to make that a political issue going into the midterms? Like, do you think it's possible that China has been seeding messaging and other things like that so that people fight against data centers and it becomes like a homegrown, we don't want data centers when really it's China pushing behind the scenes?
Certainly could be. And if it is seeded by them, at least partially or fully, they're doing a really good job at it, because it's an issue that reaches across the aisle. Um, Kathy Hochul and Josh Shapiro both are Democrats, but you had a Michigan former representative that was putting forward a bill, I believe, in the Michigan state legislature for a similar thing like this. So if it is all a coordinated psyop from the Chinese, then uh, it's certainly hit home with a lot of people, and it might have a little bit of truth to it, even if it's got pernicious intent. I wouldn't doubt that China is not past sowing seeds of division in U.S. politics. It's certainly, when you have your biggest adversary and the most, I guess, crucial technology that they're developing, it's you'd like to hinder some of that development and give your local homegrown companies the ability to I guess gain an advantage.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I mean, it is funny though, because it did go across both sides. I'm pretty sure the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, also, I don't know if it was a moratorium on data centers, but he definitely put something out about data centers. And I remember him talking about it saying, well, we don't even have the electricity capacity to bring on these data centers that they're talking about. So,
right.
I mean, it would be physically impossible for us to power these data centers with the current electricity that we have in our state. And I know Texas is their own electric grid, so they are a
Right.
little bit more constrained by what they have, and they can't take electricity from other states as easily. But it would be
Florida has a
funny if
similar
China
thing
was,
too.
yeah, if China is behind all this, though, it would be funny because they've actually united both parties a little bit on this one topic. And it's a
Yeah.
topic that I, people, it seems like everyone agrees, but I don't think there's necessarily that much fact behind it right now. It seems like historically adding data centers in your county has lowered the price of electricity for the constituents because it's just a larger base load, so they can have more power, and therefore it's cheaper for each individual person using it. But
Mhm.
that's probably because there was excess capacity on the grid at the time. So if we
Yeah.
start straining it beyond the excess capacity, we're going to have to build more, which is going to add to the fixed costs, which will then make the price of power for each person in the county higher. So it's not set in stone that adding more data centers will lower or raise the cost. I think it's still yet to be seen. But I guess there's other things like water with the cooling, though I'm pretty sure that they are working on other liquid cooling solutions in a closed loop, so it doesn't actually use more liquid each time. It
Right.
just stays the same liquid and it cools it down. It just works in a closed loop. And then there's the noise complaint with the fans and stuff like that, which might be true. And I've seen videos of people probably like a mile away from a data center where you could still hear a slight humming going on in the background. I'm pretty sure that's true in Loudoun County, Virginia, at least in some places. But I think that's been the case before. And it's one of the richest counties in the country. So people, there's costs and benefits associated with it. But I guess if you're in a bigger city or a place that's noisy anyway, it might not be as big of a deal as if you were, in the countryside and it's super
Right.
quiet, and then all of a sudden you got this constant humming going on in the background. So
Right.
it might depend on what you're used to a little bit.
Yeah.
And I would think that's something that they could probably mitigate a bit.
Yeah.
I would think.
Yeah. At a minimum, it seems like it's difficult to find where the good trade-off is, because if you're trying to put a data center in the middle of New York City, I would challenge you to be able to find the kind of power that could both power New York City and power a full-blown data center in the middle of it. And then also, if you're putting a data center in the middle of Montana, and all the people who bought land out there or who have properties and ranches out there are frustrated because now they can't just listen to the birds and listen to the wind. That's a difficult trade-off to make. And that's also, it seems like, maybe one of the subtle factors that then contributed to Elon saying, well, screw it, let's just put him in space. And I we discussed that a little bit on the last podcast. It seems like there's still a little bit of difficulty in figuring out some of the physics behind the cooling, but that he's a man of finding solutions, and it looks like he's trying to find one, at least with this. Certainly trying to find a solution just to make SpaceX profitable as well. You have to uphold a $2 trillion valuation somehow. But yeah,
It's funny when it somehow could possibly be cheaper to bring all the components for a data center up to space than it would be to deal with the local governments
yeah,
to get a data center set up in the first place, which is
yeah,
pretty crazy that it's come to that trade-off. Do you think
certainly.
there would be certain, maybe just states or counties where they would say, screw it, like we want all this new tax revenue from property taxes and other forms of taxes that could be collected from data centers? So you think there would be some states or even just counties within states that would eventually say, yeah, we'll host all the data centers. And maybe there's just small counties without many people in there, and they could somehow put the tax money to their constituents, and it's a great deal for them. And
Yeah,
maybe they end up being one of the richest counties in the country if they do it. So
could
I
be.
wonder if we're going to start seeing certain counties step up, though I suppose they're constrained by the energy resources and cooling resources that they have.
I guess that also depends just on if they say, well, we may not have a lot of reason for a lot of people to move here, but if we have a big treasury and then can partially subsidize maybe a long transmission line from a big metropolitan area, or finance a small nuclear power reactor, and then have the data center companies come in and say, hey, we'll we'll let you build here. Give you all the we'll give you all the infrastructure that you need, and consequently, you may just have to pay some small taxes or make some investments in the local communities. I mean, this is where a little bit of realpolitik comes in, and they'd have to, I guess, do a bit of arm twisting. Maybe less so, because I don't know how much you can arm twist an Apple or Microsoft in one of
Yeah.
these battles if you're a small town in the middle of Iowa. But it's certainly something where all the backlash certainly does provide a an opportunity for communities that say, well, maybe we can actually figure out how to make some money and create some benefits for our local constituents here.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this last time, but I know Vivek Ramaswamy, who's running for governor in Ohio, said something like this, where essentially the data centers would pay property taxes so they could lower property taxes for individuals. They would, I think that he even mentioned something about how the data centers that are using all the electricity would have to build more electricity capacity so that it actually lowers the costs for the constituents in the county as well. So I think there could be ways where you can make the incentives align with the people in the county enough so that they're willing to, ignore the noise, pollution, and maybe just the temporary uptick in power prices while the more capacity is getting put on the grid. So I think there might be a way that you could convince people to do it, but it's probably going to be easier. And I would guess more rural places, somewhat close to cities, because they will already have access to the power grid of the city while also being close enough. There's not much latency between the users and the data centers.
Right.
And also just the space to build them since they're enormous structures.
100%. Yeah, definitely.
But with all these new things or data centers going up, there's obviously a lot of demand for AI and AI agents.
Yeah.
So it's curious, where do we see the AI agents going and how are people using it in their daily lives?
It seems that right now a lot of people are delegating low level tasks to AI agents. If you look at it, it might be little things like doing a like improving a rough draft of an essay, or it might be improving like a pitch deck or something like that, or it might just be generating rough drafts of those things as well. You certainly don't see them doing a lot of hypercritical functions, at least yet. I've actually used an AI agent to purchase toothpaste, and that was actually pretty impressive. I used
Yeah.
our platform Authorize, and just yeah, it was actually pretty interesting how you could just how you could just hit up Claude Code and say, hey, can you go and buy me a 3 pack of toothpaste for under $10? Shows you a couple options, you choose on, or you pick one, and then it goes off, does everything by itself. It seems that there might be a little bit of worries about the adoption of things, or a little bit of more time to get adoption on functions like that. But there's there's a lot of these things that people are using them for, whether it be for building out their own algorithms or finding bugs in their code, things like that. And I guess what do you see? What do you see people using these for right now?
I think it seems at a very high level, the first thing people have used it for is outsourcing effort in a way. So anything that's high effort, maybe even slightly low thought, like you were saying, a rough draft, or maybe it's just writing the code that they've thought of before, or making a PowerPoint or doing it an Excel sheet, things that were just tasks that took up most of people's time, but maybe didn't necessarily require a ton of thought outside the very beginning of it when you're just thinking about the structure and what you want. So it
Right.
seems like that's the first thing what most people are using AI agents for right now. And then it gets a little, maybe there's some people using it for things like judgment. So is this good? Is this bad? Do I want this? And then the thing where even less people are using it is to like actually execute per se transactions, like what we're building with Authorize. So and we kind of sit in between the judgment and the execution of it. So
Right.
people, more people feel more comfortable giving it the labor, so doing the effort. They feel less comfortable with it saying this is the right thing to buy, and even less comfortable saying, let my AI agent buy this. But
Yeah.
I think in time, as the AI agents do improve and people get more data from how their AI agent has worked in the past and seen its judgment, and if it seems like its judgment's good, then they'll feel more comfortable, pushing up the effort, judgment, execution scale of
Sure.
it. So but the
Yeah.
first time when these AI agents first came out, when Claude or when ChatGPT first came out a few years ago, it was almost magical when you saw it respond to your answer perfectly. You're like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. And then I
Right.
remember when we first made Authorize and the agent bought something for the first time, it was a very similar feeling and like, wow, this is really cool what this can do. So I think as more people see it and get exposure to it and they hear maybe influencers or CEOs or other people saying that they're using it for these reasons, they'll start to
Mhm.
become more and more comfortable with it, and AI agents will start to grow their capabilities from just effort to judgment to executing. And I think
Right.
it's only a matter of time before almost everybody is using it for all three of those.
Yeah, I was going to say that it's not like once it goes to judgment, it gives up on the effort. It seems that there will still be a lot of those things that humans still do want the oversight or to be putting their own checks and balances on things. And so they might just have it like for me, I've had it spit out like a 3 statement financial model for some of the publicly traded stocks that I follow just in Excel so that I can manipulate it and then try to mess with some of the assumptions to figure out, okay, well, what kind of valuation should I should I be expecting of this company? But there's a lot of those functions that I don't really see as going away from humans. It's just going to be integrated with AI more so. And then once people do trust them a little bit more, they may not hand off all of these responsibilities onto with judgment and execution onto the agent itself, but they may just maintain a bit more of an oversight type relationship with it, as we've seen with a lot of these or as we've discussed with a lot of software developers or product managers or people like that. They can occupy different roles at the same time, and they can more so act as a director of those roles rather than an executor of those roles. And so it seems that they may they may have the time to actually be able to act as both an executor and an overseer of those. It just might be that they have to do less work on the execution and effort, or less work on the judgment and effort end, and they can do more work on the execution and the oversight end. So,
Mhm.
and
I
that's
think, sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
I was
Yeah,
going to say, I think it comes in our first podcast. We were talking about how humans will always be around to take accountability for the things that AI agents do. And I think that kind of ties back into what we're talking about now, in the sense that if your boss can't yell at your agent or do much to your agent if your agent screws something up and buys the wrong thing, but he can yell at you if or if your agent buys the wrong thing. So
yeah,
humans have to be there to take some sort of accountability for it. But I think in
right,
time there will be enough data to for the people using the AI agents to realize that this is, it might have as good a judgment on this as I do in the first place. So, I
yeah,
screw up something and have to take accountability for the screw up, once a month or something. But this thing maybe now only screws up once every 2 months. So it's actually has better judgment than me. And I
right,
think that kind of gets back to the point I think we were talking about in our first podcast as well, where there's Claude and Codex and stuff like that are beginning to default to auto mode. So not having to say, okay, yes, do this, yes, do that. And because the requests almost become the bottleneck in a way, a lot of times, especially for things like coding, where it's able to do so much of it so quickly. And if you have a few of them going at once, then the approval requests just start stacking up so much, and you maybe stop reading them as carefully. And so in time, the judgment of the AI model to do certain things might be better than the pace that you can keep up with and approve them. So
right.
in some ways, it might end up being a better solution to just let it do what it wants to do. But in the meantime, it does seem like, especially for things like payments, where it's not easily reversible,
Right.
where you will want to get some sort of approval, which is why we built in the approvals and the rules and to authorize. So I think that's going to be important for a while, but in time, the approval layer is going to be less important outside the fact of auditing and seeing what agent bought what when.
As you said, it definitely seems like it's the biggest bottleneck to it. It can code and move quicker on these things than you can approve them. And so you constantly having to go back to Claude and say, yes, move forward with this. Yes, make this API call. Yes, pay for this data set. Yes, structure my code this way. That's certainly going to be something that eventually, as the trust is established, or maybe not trust in the same way we as humans understand it, but the understanding that the AI agent is using the proper line of thinking to address the problem that you want it to address, then the trust is there, where a lot more of the approval layers are gone. But on critical functions, it's difficult to see where that will be gone, because if your AI agent does go out and, God forbid, spends all your money, what do you have as recourse, or how much of a headache is it going to be simply to untangle that and get those payments reversed and make sure that you don't just have all these products delivered to you that you didn't want. So
Yeah.
that's that seems to be a bottleneck that will be here for the foreseeable future, frankly. And will it should be interesting to see if it really will ever go away. I personally don't think that it will, because the AI agent, as we said, it doesn't have to pay rent. The AI agent doesn't have to buy groceries. It doesn't have kids to feed. And when you have factors like that are uniquely human, it's difficult to really instill the magnitude of what one wrong decision will cause down the line with something like that. And
Yeah.
even if it is possible to instill it, can it actually truly understand it and truly like empathize with that to a certain degree. And that's where it's difficult to, frankly, I would say it's impossible for the model to truly understand that, because it's simply not human in that sense. And that's
Yeah, it
where
doesn't understand the world.
exactly it can aggregate data and it can draw connections between these things, but it doesn't have the same aspirations. It doesn't have the same value system, if you will. It doesn't have the same interests, ability to love, to be angry, to be happy, to feel joy, to feel pain. It doesn't have these characteristics that make us uniquely human. And one of those of simply having that requirement of needing money, and then the downside of not having money, that's something that it might not be able to comprehend in an emotional sense. It can comprehend it in a logical sense, but not emotionally with the magnitude that comes with that.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
there's many decisions that aren't even necessarily binary, right? Like
right.
I know one of our topics for today was talking about how AI therapists and things like that, or you might have a human telling you something, and if you're the AI agent, how do you handle something like that? It's a little bit complicated since it's not human. It's hard for it to maybe empathize. It can look at studies and other literature online, but it won't have it won't understand the emotion and maybe uh,
Right.
know the best way to change how people's opinions on things are and change their mindset.
Absolutely. Yeah. It when it's not sitting across from a face, or it's not a face sitting across from a face, then it's it doesn't have the same emotions that go through its head, or it doesn't have the same primacy of understanding that this is somebody with their own goals, aspirations, and difficulties that they're trying to work through. And then maybe through unique circumstances that have been described to it, try to understand maybe this is not the right approach to go with reconciling these issues you may have with your sibling, or
Mhm.
reconciling these issues you may have with your romantic partner, or something like that. And because one of the things that a lot of people talk about, and it's very understandable, is just the issues with HIPAA and with the issues with the data privacy. Understandably so. It also seems though that if you're trying to give a therapy type interaction, if you're trying to delegate a therapy type interaction out to a computer, can it even give you proper therapy in that? It might be able to for lower level functions, like we were saying, with these agents that can spit out the low effort things, but with much more critical things where it might be reconciling issues with your family, do you want to trust a computer with that? And that's where it's a bit more of the personal judgment of the user. And you hope that they at least understand that maybe maybe this algorithm that I'm talking to doesn't necessarily have the same capabilities as me, because it's not a human in the same way that I am.
Yeah.
And it's not a lack of training or information that it has, but there's a lack of proper emotion that you're able to instill in it. I guess I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on that too.
I've never personally been to a therapist, so I don't know exactly what happens in a therapy meeting. But I would think there's certain things where if you're a therapist and you have someone talking to you, you almost have to convince them that what they're saying is wrong. And like make them realize that themselves, I would think. Because if they're coming to you saying, "Oh, my family hates me," or my mom's mean to me, they might not be giving, if it's just the person talking to an AI agent therapist, then they might not be giving it all the context that the AI agent would even need
Right.
to assess the situation. And the AI agent might not have any way of knowing that this person's not giving you all the information that's out there. And
Right.
it's really just a one-sided opinion. Whereas if you're a therapist, you could probably see that they're a little emotionally upset, maybe, or they're angry, and there's certain things
Yeah.
you can see that they're not telling you.
Right.
And I think an AI agent, especially if it's just a chat bot, would miss certain things like that, where it would have no way of knowing that you're telling it the wrong thing. So it
Right.
probably just assumes what you're telling it is true, and then giving you uh, feedback or opinions based on that, without much pushback. And I think especially Claude and ChatGPT have had this sort of reputation of being sycophantic, and they just tell you what you want to hear a lot of times. So if you're a person who's suicidal or a person that's wanting to shoot someone or something crazy like that, if you're the person giving the Claude or the ChatGPT or the agent all the context about your situation, then it might be reasonable if Claude only thinks that's true to say, oh yeah, that's the right course of action, when really you're only giving it 1/10 of the context that it really needs. And
Right.
it's a terrible decision. And Claude just has no way of knowing. So I think there's certain limitations to at least chatbot interfaces to these types of AI therapists.
Yeah, certainly. And I mean, that's what one of the points that you brought up is that therapists definitely they have a larger breadth of context into the interactions that you have, because generally people go in for hour-long sessions where they're explaining things, they're explaining how their week went, how their interactions with, let's use the example of the issues with or the rift between them and their family.
Mhm.
They explain the interactions that they've had, how they're terse, they're short, they're generally angry, they're generally unproductive. And well, what you would hope for with a good therapist is that they can give you an honest assessment of what you might be doing wrong. Because I actually, outside of the AI debate, there's actually, I've spoken with my sister about this and just other folks about it as well, where some therapy, because the incentive actually is patient volume and patient flow. And I don't know if it's as pernicious as this, where the therapist is actively indulging you in behaviors that are detrimental to yourself and detrimental to your relationships in order to make you feel like their friend and just to get you in the door more. I think a lot of it is just an inability for some weaker therapists, I may say, or less less yeah, weaker is probably a good word, to really say where you might be going wrong as an individual, because the ultimate goal is the reconciliation between you and your family, or the ultimate goal is a proper reconciliation and reconciliation with your romantic partner or your friend that you might be on the outs with, or any of these things. And that's one of those things where I guess the it depends on the the core tenets that Claude and Chat have instilled in them as the proper morals and the proper route forward, where it might be able to shoot back at you and say, "Hey, no, you're being too judgmental on your sister, and she's trying to reach out to you, and you're just saying that she's wasting your time or whatever it may be." And that's where I guess it would depend on probably being the right people with the right, I guess, incentives, maybe not incentives, but the right beliefs in what the long-term viability of the human race and of the user base would be, in trying to get them to do the most productive thing for themselves, maybe not the easiest thing for themselves. So,
Yeah. The thing is too with that, I wonder, I almost would guess that the relationship between like a therapist and the person going to them matters a good amount. Like if the person in therapy hated the therapist, they're probably less likely to take any advice of theirs.
right,
And if they're on, and I don't think it's very easy for a chatbot to build a relationship with the person in the same way. So it, even if it was the same words being said by both a person and a chatbot, it might not have the same efficacy as the person versus the chatbot. So I want there might be other things like that where you just need to have a person that you trust and respect to give you that advice, or else
right.
you're just going to say screw that, you're an idiot, um,
Yeah,
and not get anything from it. And maybe it might even just uh,
yeah,
sort of feed back into their original opinion even more.
yeah. You can certainly see it too with other areas. Like if you're very frustrated about something and you want to go off and sue somebody, you give the chatbot all the information you have on on the case, and it might come back to you if it's smart, and if it's actually has your best interests in mind and the best interests of, the court system and whatever else it may be, then it might come back to you if it's properly trained and say, well, all you're going to do is waste money here, and frankly, you don't really have much of a case to stand on. You're going to back up the courts more. You're going to really just cause more of a rift between it. If it's a close relationship, you're going to absolutely burn that to the ground. If it's not a close relationship, you're just going to spend a lot of money and time doing something that'll be completely unproductive. There's a lot of these things where you might actually need to the information actually isn't the bottleneck there. It's the judgment that is, and it's the trust of the judgment that is. And
Yeah.
that's where, yeah, it's
Ties back into our earlier point about how you're more likely to outsource the effort before the judgment. And so,
right. Definitely.
and that
Yeah.
makes a lot of sense. But the thing is too, when the models get better and better, do you think that's going to improve the judgment enough on things like that? Or is it just improving intellectual capabilities and maybe less so emotional ones where it's able to, especially for therapists, where that might matter more?
My personal opinion is that there's a certain amount of these things that can't really be outsourced from humans, because there's a certain amount of these things that humans have to have skin in the game for other humans to properly trust in. It doesn't necessarily mean, like we were saying, that the intelligence could be there, even the judgment could be there, but you might still need a human face to be able to put it forward to you rather than have the chatbot interface put it forward to you, because there's still just a level of emotionality and just maybe a biological hardwiring that makes it a little bit more difficult for somebody to properly trust an individual with that, or makes it difficult for somebody to trust an algorithm with that, simply because the algorithm doesn't pay the consequences. I guess if you
What if there,
properly, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
what if there was like a deep fake version of a person talking to you with it? Do you think that would improve the outcome?
It it could. Yeah, I hadn't considered that. That's something that definitely could be that could happen in the future. Absolutely. And I, my mind tends to go to the more dangerous outcomes and the scarier outcomes. And so I think that that's certainly a possibility, where it's your mom's telling you to wire her $10,000 or something like that. But no, I certainly see that as a major possibility. I guess that might just beg the necessity for people to actually have more human interaction, and rather than play into the trends of a lot of technology and a lot of advances in society where it makes it less required for people to go outside and speak with another human being. Because now you could counter me with saying, well, what about the robot human, or what about the humanoid robots that are looking more and more like humans? And it's starting to get a little dystopian in my own mind, but it certainly seems like, at least for now, the real way of properly orienting yourself in the world when these tools are drawing you away from humans is to maybe try to draw yourself closer into humans and try to establish that trust, because it's easy to get isolated and to stay in your own bubble, your own echo chamber. I mean, we've seen this with Twitter and Instagram and other Facebook, just with things like political affiliations and political views, where people get caught in their own echo chambers, and all of a sudden they start cutting off family and friends, people, extremely valuable relationships, because one of them likes Trump and one of them hates Trump, and one of them loves Biden, one of them hates Biden, whatever it may be. But yeah,
Now that is a good point. But I think one other piece with the AI therapist thing is you might have to compare it with the alternatives available to certain people. Like if you're a wealthy person and you're in the United States, you probably can get access to a pretty good therapist. But imagine you're maybe in a rural area, poor, not many resources, no health insurance. Maybe if the choice is between an AI therapist and no therapist, and you have certain mental problems of sorts, would it be better to have the AI therapist versus none?
good question. I hate countering or I hate answering every question with it depends, but I
Mm.
feel like it does because it depends on what your problem might be and also what the downsides of the interaction giving you improper judgment might be. I mean, if it's something where it's just like, hey, like I'm a little nervous in this new town. I don't really know how to make friends. There's certainly a lot to be gained and little to be lost by just somebody not or just by the chatbot maybe getting it wrong or maybe not knowing who it's talking to with quite the personal depth that but if it's something where it's like I'm in an abusive relationship and things have gone well before and I want them to go well, or should I just how do I reconcile this or do I just leave? Where there's huge downsides to certain things like that. And so that's where I would say there's a lot to be gained on the lower levels of this, but on the higher levels and higher stakes areas of the what do you call it of the endeavors that or of the judgments that Claude or ChatGPT can make with these, that's where you need a little bit of skin in the game of the person that's giving you the advice. And
Mhm.
that's a little bit tough to do if frankly if you're just out in rural Alabama where there might not be a therapist for 50 miles or something, or
Yeah,
you might just not really have health insurance or something to cover it.
yeah, that makes sense.
I
And
know
especially
it's
with things of where someone might hurt themselves or hurt others, where you
right,
you you really you don't want to give a concrete answer one way or another.
right,
But
definitely. Yeah.
but the next topic we were going to talk about is how Anthropic's Fable model hasn't quite seen the adoption that maybe most people expected, and it kind of brings up the question of, is the smarter model always going to be the one people default to? Is it going to increase the demand for models?
Yeah. It's difficult to well, it's interesting because most of the talk at this point, or up until this point, has been around super intelligence and it just around the hyper competent, hyper intelligent models. And it seems as though now you start to see the companies in the model, the companies like DeepSeek and their models gaining a lot more traction because the token cost for something like Fable 5 usage is just it gets insanely high if you're not if it's a task that runs X amount of time. And it's it begs the question in my mind if the economic model for these things will just be lower quality inference and but lower costs, or if the higher quality inference still is the route and people will eventually find a use case for it. I'm curious as to what your opinion is on that, because as far as the economics of it go, it seems like it's been economically viable up until Fable 5 or up until maybe Opus 4.8. And then now it's starting to possibly drop off both with the training and inference costs.
Yeah, I think this is a tricky question because on one end of the spectrum, I think if you're able to make better models, it first of all attracts better talent. So you want to have the best human capital possible so you can generate the best models. And in order, it appears that in order to make a better, cheaper model, you almost first have to make a better, a better, more expensive model. It seems like you do. There is definitely a reason why you would want to make maybe a more expensive model that's smarter because it attracts the people and it attracts or it makes the next cheaper model better. So I
Right.
think that's a pretty big thing for companies like Anthropic. But it definitely does seem like for most tasks, you might not need the most intelligent model to complete it. For example, if you're just filling out a pretty basic Excel sheet, you probably don't need Fable to do it. If you're doing some basic coding task, you probably don't need Fable to do it. You might not even need Opus to do it. So I think in time, and I think that's part of the reason why products like OpenRouter have become very popular and why Stripe just acquired OpenRouter, because figuring out what model makes the most sense for what task is important and it can save people a lot of money. I do think I think in time people will use the cheaper models, but in order to make the cheaper models, I think you'll need the better, more expensive models. Um,
Sure.
if nothing else, to attract the talent to work on them.
Definitely. Yeah, I wonder also, well, I don't wonder. I could foresee a time at which a lot of these companies who use Claude or who use ChatGPT and have paid subscriptions to them, they start coming back to all their employees and saying, hey, we actually need to have training sessions on what model you're supposed to use for what kinds of tasks. Because I see that sometimes where I where people are running up huge expenses on their token usage. And when you start to think of, will it actually have the payoff that I'm putting into it on the front end? Is it really going to be useful there? I mean, everybody wants to use AI, but then once it starts to rear its ugly head as far as the costs go with it, then I certainly imagine that you're going to have HR departments or IT departments that are coming to the employee base and saying, hey, for the marketing department, you're not allowed to use above Opus 4.7. You can generate decks, you can build out campaign outlines, you can build out whatever it may be, but Fable 5, first of all, is off limits for the entire company. This department's allowed to use up to this model. This department's only allowed to use up to that model. This department, frankly, they can only use like Sonnet 5.
That is funny because that reminded me, I think it was Andre Carpathy who said something like, people are saying these models aren't smarter, but it's not that they're not getting smarter. It's that the people don't have problems hard enough to notice the difference. And it kind of gets to that point there that most people are not doing anything that's that complicated. Average IQ by definition is 100 of people. 50% of people are going to be above, 50% are going to be below. And realistically, the tasks that the 50% of the people below 100 are doing are not going to be very difficult tasks, realistically,
Right.
or anything that the Opus 5 couldn't do. And so I
Yeah.
think there's certain tasks where you will want to use the smartest model, and maybe for certain things like drug discovery or things
Mhm.
that are very complicated. Whereas for most tasks like filling out an Excel sheet or even just doing some basic coding, I don't think you necessarily need the smartest model. And so it would
Yeah.
really just be a waste of money to do it. I mean, it would be like putting out a little match with like a fire hose, and you'd just be complete overkill in many ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because the it, the incentive is for Anthropic and for OpenAI to not give people an outline as to the kinds of tasks that are required or that require a certain threshold of model, because they would love to have you using Fable 5 to just fill out a basic spreadsheet or to edit a pitch deck or do something like that. It is interesting how I don't fault them for that, but it's one of those where a lot of people probably don't understand the hidden costs that come along with them using an overpowered model for an an underwhelming task or an underwhelming task, if you will.
Well,
And
I wonder if it is in there, if it is necessarily in Anthropic's best interest to do that, because for presumptively the reason why they're charging more per token on things like Fable versus Sonnet is that it costs them more to actually produce the tokens. From their business's point of view, if it does make more sense to push people toward Fable, even if it's not necessary, versus pushing them toward the proper model. Because I mean, in time too, if people realize that Anthropic's just been consistently pushing them toward a more expensive model when it wasn't necessary, I think that in some ways might ruin the trust between the customer and Anthropic,
it
which
could,
might
yeah,
decrease the amount of revenue and the profit. But I think there's also points like, I think Anthropic's come out and said something like Opus is good for most things. You probably don't need Fable for most. And they put
yeah,
out Opus 5 after Fable 5, and which is good, almost as good for most tasks. So
yeah,
it seems like they're kind of acknowledging that maybe people don't really need to use the most expensive model for most things.
yeah,
And I wonder if they have, I mean, I don't think it's known, but I wonder if they actually have better margin on things like Opus versus Fable. Is in some ways Anthropic might just have to eat it because it's so expensive for a Fable token that it's just not as profitable to to be using it. So I think it's unclear. I think it's yet to be yet to be decided. But I know it did cost a lot of. I'm sure it costs a lot of money with the compute necessary just to build Fable. So
Right.
they will probably have to find a way to get a return on that investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. That that's that might go back to a little bit to the question of, are these companies just going to start making maybe less powerful but more efficient models, just trying to optimize on the margins and the token usage, because that does seem like that's, if there's only so many tasks that people can find use cases for Fable 5, then why are we trying to make Fable 6? Or why are we trying to make more intelligent models if currently they, these are solutions looking for problems, it seems like. And there's not a lot of problems out there. And so then when you look at the front end cost to even develop them, is there ever going to be enough of a supply of problems for them to solve where people are going to pay for enough token usage in using these models to justify the upfront development costs and the inference costs on the back end as well?
Yeah, and then there's also the calculus of the government potentially not allowing people to use it for a while. Like when Mythos came out and Fable, the government pretty much said, not
Right.
everyone's going to be able to use this. So
Yeah.
I think that also factors into. So that, I mean, that also could be part of the reason why Fable hasn't seen quite the amount of demand that maybe people were expecting for it. I mean, because
Right.
it did get cut off for a good period of time, and there's still plenty of other countries outside the United States that are just not able to use it. So
Yeah, they had to regarner all the hype with that. And I mean, Dario Amodei didn't do himself a ton of favors, at least within the US government, by saying that it could hack government systems, and then having all the beef with regards to the Claude usage that would, or with Claude being used in the Maduro raid and things like that. It seems as though like the government came back and they were basically putting the message to him that, hey, we run the show here, despite you having the most powerful super intelligence in the world. We still are the ones that can derail your entire operation and make you go back and try to regarner all that interest in your new model that you might have spent, say, a couple $1 billion developing at this point. And
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. At the end of the day, you don't want to. If you're a U.S. company, you probably don't want to threaten or.
don't forget who's the top dog there. Yeah,
Yes.
it's yeah,
But it is funny though, because with the models getting better and the context windows getting larger and larger, they've taken up more and more of the memory chip market, which has then therefore made things like your iPhone, your Kindle, your Alexa become more expensive because there's only so much silicon in the world, and the places making the memory chips are now using it for the high bandwidth memory for the to put next to the GPUs. And so it's
mm,
making all these consumer devices a lot more expensive.
yeah.
How do you think that's going to affect the market? Do you think that's going to, yeah, I guess affect the demand for certain devices like the iPhone? How do you see that all playing out?
Lucky for Apple, they just have a sort of cult-like following with some of these things, and they hit it out of the park with the iPhone 17 and 17 Pro. I forget what the sales came in at, but I believe they were something like 20% above what their forecast was. And I mean, that's massive for a company that's probably forecasting billions of dollars in sales in the first, say, like year of
Yeah,
a new iPhone model being out. I mean, probably tens of billions of dollars for a new iPhone model each time it comes out.
probably
So,
hundreds of billions, dude.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think Apple is over a
I need to
trillion
go
revenue.
back and reopen their 10K. It's been a while, but yeah. No, I mean it's so with a company like Apple, I don't see that as affecting them too much. And the thing about Apple too is they've diversified their product offerings pretty good, where they've found a way to maintain the premium allure generally with the whole company and all their products, but they've been able to make some cheaper products like the Mac Mini and some of the more mini versions. And I forget what the new MacBook Air was. That was basically just like a Nerf version of the current MacBook
The
Air.
Neo,
Yeah, that's it. And they found a way to still maintain that cult like following for all their brand loyalty. But if for a company like Amazon with Kindles and things like that, Kindles, they're also a difficult thing because relative to an iPhone, I don't know a lot of people that buy a Kindle with plans of buying another one in a year. I do know a lot of people that buy an iPhone with plans of buying another one in a year. And
Yeah.
it's funny because an iPhone is far more expensive than a Kindle is. And
I
people,
think it might get to their business model though, because I think at Amazon, things like Kindles and Alexa are loss leaders in a way. Like they'll sell them at a loss to get you into their ecosystem so that you buy the books on from the Kindle, or
right,
you're buying things from Alexa. And so they're fine taking a loss on that. And therefore they also don't want to sell you one every 2 years.
yeah,
Whereas Apple makes money on the iPhone and they want to sell you one every 2 years. And then they also lock you in and make more money on that as well through the App Store.
right, definitely. With some of their other products, though, for Amazon at least, if it's something like a Fire TV or a Fire TV stick, will that just start pushing more people then to Apple TV, or will that start pushing more people to Google? I forget what Google's version is. Might be Google TV. There's a
Mhm.
lot of other alternatives out there for some of these products that if other companies are able to suppress the costs on those by passing off the costs onto other products, maybe compressing margins a little bit here to keep stable margins in this category, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a downstream effect of this. And Amazon, well, they are certainly well, they're certainly able to make money in the hardware space. They might this might be a trend that then eventually forces them to get out of the hardware space because they might just throw up their hands and say, why are we even dealing in this? We have AWS, it's already really high margin. We might be losing a little bit of market share to Google Cloud, possibly Azure, but we still have a very reliable customer base and we can dedicate a lot more resources there where it's actually going to have a lot more return on investment, where we might just be running into a brick wall of not being able to even optimize the product margins at this point with the hardware. That's something that I actually could foresee happening because it doesn't seem as though Amazon on their hardware offerings has ever had a huge amount of brand loyalty or particularly amazing margins, both with things like the books that you have to buy for your Kindle or the movies that you have to buy through Amazon Prime. Well, with the movies, you might actually have a pretty good margin or something there, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I bet you the books on the Kindle probably have a pretty good margin as well. I don't know the specifics, but I think
yeah. If
I
it
mean I
just
think
gets reproduced and they already have the rights to it, it probably is relatively easy because at that point you're just paying for memory. And
yeah.
it's,
But I guess you might be able to make the argument like, couldn't Amazon just have like a Kindle app on your phone or your iPad, and then therefore they don't even have to make the hardware, and you could still use their product or service. But I guess if that were the case, then wouldn't Apple just have their? And I think Apple probably already has something like this, where they would have their own store for buying books, and they could probably kind of push out Amazon and say like we're not going to let you do this because we have our own version of it. It's pretty much the same exact thing. And so
they
in some ways,
could,
maybe Amazon needs the device just to get the people to actually buy the books from them.
yeah, I could totally see that. And at least in the Kindle or in the electronic reading space, the Kindle at least has a bit of a lead though, just in terms of like the way that the screen is set up and because you can read it when it's light out. I don't know exactly what the screen type is called that makes that different than the Apple glossy screen that you have to adjust the brightness to be able to see it when it's very bright out versus when it's dark out. But there's a little bit of an advantage that they have there that I think would at least deter them a little bit from even wanting to then possibly spawn that battle with Apple by trying to go into their space and say, hey, do this on the download the Kindle app on the App Store and then download your books directly onto here and compete with Apple's current offering. But as we also have talked about in previous episodes, Apple in general has not been a big winner on the software front. They've been a big winner on the hardware front. And
Mhm.
that it could be something where with Amazon deciding to maybe step into their turf a little bit, Apple might just say, well, we've lost money on pages, we've lost money on numbers, we've lost money on all these different things that we've tried to recreate that other people got to the party first with. Would it just behoove us to then maybe try to integrate a little bit more with Amazon and allow them to do this without trying to push them out or trying to push our own offering more.
Yeah, I do wonder. I feel like with something like a book, though, it might not make as much of a difference because I feel like what is the reason why people use Excel over Pages? I think there might be a few. One of them might be that certain commands are different. When you type equal whatever formula you might be using,
With the formulas.
it could be
Yeah.
slightly different on Pages versus Excel. I
Somebody
guess
that uses Excel, it's worlds, but even with people that use Google Sheets versus Microsoft Excel, it's a world of difference once you start just with the interface and with the speed at which it moves, and also with the amount of data that you can actually pack into a single file, or at least that you can load into a single file at a time.
yeah.
That's
And
and
there might be
I've never
network
even
effects
tried
too.
number. Was that?
I said there might be certain network effects around it too. Like if everyone in your work has the Excel app, then it really just makes sense to be sending Excel. So if you got a Google Sheet, dude, like you'd be like, come on, man, like we all use Excel here. Why are you sending me a Google Sheet?
Yeah, I mean, even if you can save it in the Excel format, it still is a bit of a headache going back and forth between the two. The formulas don't always translate over properly, or they might need a little bit of tinkering with them for them to properly populate in the cells. But yeah, there's little effects like that happen between the programs there that just make it where the network effects are huge. And that's why you see entire organizations that say, no, we only use Microsoft. No, we only use Google. No, I don't know of an organization that says, no, we only use Numbers and Pages. Yeah. God love them if they do. I could never imagine doing that. But yeah.
I wonder if the increased memory costs are part of the reason why Apple hasn't made much of a move into the AI space. Because presumptively Apple's waiting for a model that they can use on the local phone, so it wouldn't be in the cloud. Therefore, there wouldn't be as many privacy risks. So I figure Apple's probably waiting for their Siri to be good enough with a small model that works on their phone. And if they can't get enough memory at a price point that makes sense for their users, then maybe that's part of the reason why they haven't made the move yet.
Yeah, that among many other costs definitely seems like just the upfront cost to develop a model and then to be building a data center or renting space at a data center. There's a huge amount of upfront cost in that. And like we've spoken or like we've discussed on previous episodes, it seems as though Apple is fully content to stay in their own lane and say, hey, we're a $5 trillion company based mostly off of hardware already. Do we really want to go and spend a bunch of money trying to become a software company as well, or to have our software be as dominant as our hardware? It would be trying to make a move when it's first and 15 for them. They're starting from behind, and they're starting from pretty far behind when it comes to that. So
Yeah.
the memory, I would imagine that the memory certainly has a big effect on that. It they wouldn't have upped the prices on these things on any of their devices if it wasn't for the fact that it was actually eating significantly into their margins, because it does have kind of a bad look when the rest of the world, or when the rest of the country, is saying, well, I'm already struggling from inflation pretty badly, and apples have gone up X amount in price, and eggs as well, and milk as well. It there's a lot of things that then, if it comes to one thing that you can refuse to buy for a year, an iPhone seems like a pretty prudent thing to say, hey, I'll wait another year until this phone actually breaks, then I don't need a new one. But
Yeah, but wouldn't you think if Apple were to start, figuring out what they're going to do with AI, like in my opinion, Siri, I should be able to tell it to do things for me. Like right now, you could tell it to set an alarm for it. You could tell it to set a reminder, but I should be able to tell Siri to order me food. Like, that should be possible. I should be able to say, order me 2 McDoubles and a McChicken from McDonald's and have it delivered to me through
yeah,
Uber Eats or whatever. And it should be able to do it. I mean, that's not like a super complicated task. It should be able to, connect to an MCP of Uber Eats or something like that, and then be able to place the order and get it delivered to me. And wouldn't you think if you were selling an iPhone, if you wanted more people to buy a new one, you would come out with something really new and cool like that, where it's only available on the new iPhone. And so that therefore it almost creates a demand or an incentive to go and buy the new one, therefore increasing their iPhone sales. And plus, they could probably make a small cut of maybe that food order or whatever tasks they're doing through that.
Yeah. The way I see it is Apple they pride themselves on having high quality products. It might be something where they're reluctant to push something out that they know might be half baked and a little some kinks in it that they want to work out, because when AirPods came out, it wasn't like there were a lot of improvements that needed to be made as far as their functionality. There were improvements that were made just as far as the physical design. But ever since AirPods came out, they've basically been fantastic. Ever since iPhones came out, they've been really good. All their products, they generally put them out and they don't need a ton of big fixes to them. And they probably take that perspective into the AI race as well, where they say, well, we could put something out and then have the market's reaction to it help us to improve it and have all the sentiments that people are saying online give us the proper feedback for this. Or we might end up doing that and then tarnishing a little bit of our brand reputation. And
Yeah.
then at what point does that start to bleed over into our sales of our hardware, our sales of our accessories, our sales of whatever it may be? There's a lot of these things that are somewhat unquantifiable factors that I would assume a company like Apple understands the kind of premium that people pay for those unquantifiable factors, where you buy AirPods and you're not expecting them to break, and that's because they just flat out don't usually. They take a
Yeah.
while to break. Your iPhone takes a while before it actually becomes a piece of garbage, but it works really well when you do have it and it's working in its prime state.
Yeah, it's
But
almost like a brand risk. Like they don't want a sloppy product associated with the brand.
absolutely. Yeah.
I do think I actually agree. I think that's why Apple hasn't made the move. I think they're just a little too nervous about it since
Yeah.
soft AI, you can't rely on it doing the same thing every time. So there's certain risks. Like what if it
Absolutely.
ordered the wrong thing for you? What there's certain risks. Like who does that fall on? I mean, if you tell Siri to go buy you food and it orders the wrong thing, I mean, I guess it's on Siri, but how do you handle
Right.
that? So, and Apple probably doesn't want to deal with that.
I mean, even with something as small as like, say you tell it to order your food, but the last location you ordered food to on Uber Eats was a different place, or you were on vacation or something, and they see something like that and they're like, well, how do we work through this? Like, as far as IP tracking and then like auto updates to the delivery address or whatever it may be. There's probably a lot of things like that Apple's considered where they imagine, as you said, they have a brand reputation to uphold. And if they don't uphold that, they probably worry about the downstream effects of that more than other companies may, because other companies take the perspective of, well, we put something out, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be able to be improved over time. And once it gets improved and once it gets optimized, then people are really going to want to use it. And we're already going to have a user base in there that already wants to use it. So,
No, that definitely makes sense. And when you're $1 trillion company, that's you almost just want to hold on to it, and it's definitely riskier to take
yeah,
risks, I suppose, than it would be if you're a new company. But
right.
ultimately, that could be what ends up shooting Apple in the foot. If you just are afraid of taking risks so much that you don't take any, then maybe it's
Yeah,
fine for a few years, but in time, it'll probably come back to bite you, I would think.
it could for sure. And I certainly could see it being something that would bite them in the ass. But I mean, I think right now they're also fully content to have all their excess cash just, or maybe a good portion of their excess cash just go into share buybacks and then just continue to float the stock price up more and more. I
Yeah,
mean,
just
if
return
you're
money to shareholders, basically.
yeah, exactly. They've been pretty good with that. There's a reason that Warren Buffett, who's pretty critical of a lot of valuations and a lot of companies out there. I mean, maybe not critical, but also just is unwilling to put his money behind them. He puts it behind Apple, and it's because they buy back like crazy, and they just put it. All that does is just float up your earnings per share, and all it does is just then create more money for each share that you have in your pocket. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you don't have to speculate about Apple. Like, they're going to sell iPhones, they're going to sell AirPods.
Yep.
It's less speculative, which I think is part of the reason why Warren Buffett likes it. They have a pretty good track record at this point in time.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Well, good podcast, Dave Reagan. I think we had a bunch of good topics from the backlash of data centers all the way through the memory chip price and even just our talk about the AI therapists. I thought that was a good chat.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you guys as the viewers want to bounce back any ideas off of us too, that'd be great. Or if you have some critiques, we'd love to hear them in the comments too. And feel free to interact with this video. We'd love to interact more with our viewers and just get some more feedback as to how we can improve this. So
definitely like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and we'll be back again next week with a new episode.